Hello, good afternoon. And I do have Dr. Dan Kessler with me. Hello, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
All right. I think it's been a while since we did a podcast. And as we were chatting a few minutes ago, to do like a quick recap of both the two of the sports that we both like, both golf and tennis. Just go through some of the major winners and Grand Slam winners in each of the sports, and then talk about some of the breakout players and also some players who didn't live up to the potential this year, and then maybe a slight preview for what's to come in next year. All right, so let's start with golf, Dan. I
Yeah.
mean, why don't you give your analysis on what happened this year for the PGA, and then I'll chime in.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, basically, this year, as far as the majors were concerned, you sent me a nice recap earlier this morning when we were discussing this podcast. As far as the different majors, John Rahm got the season going to a fast start at now he's now obviously switched over to the live tour. We can comment on that later, but anyways, for while he spent the whole year on the PGA tour, he had a strong showing at the Masters. Was he put on the green jacket there. Kepka was in the lead. I remember after the first three rounds, Kepka had the lead to begin on Sunday at the Masters, but Rahm just was too
Right.
tough on Sunday, from what I recall, thinking back to that day. And I remember you were pulling for Rahm. I was pulling for Kepka, if I remember correctly.
Correct.
And Rahm got the better of him at that tournament and put on the green jacket for the first time. It was the first. I think it was very significant, right? You can help me out as far as was it the
The
anniversary?
Chevy Ballesteros. It
Yeah.
was, I think, the 60th anniversary, I think, of what could have been Sevy's, birthday. I think that was the day that he got the green jacket.
So yeah, so he was the first Spaniard to wear it since. Well, I guess Sergio has won. I guess Sergio, Sevi, and Olazabal, right? The three. So it's the
Yep.
fourth Spaniard now to don the green jacket. So that's the significance of that. And then moving on to the PGA Championship, Kepka got some revenge there. He played a tough. I forget if he had a real challenger at that tournament. I'm trying to think back to where it was played at. Um, I'm blanking if anyone really gave him a run on Sunday or not, or if he just kind of had the lead and just kind of ran with it on Sunday. But do you recall how that kind of played?
No, I don't recall that, but I do remember that he did come back very strong after the Masters. I would call it the debacle, and pretty much dominated the field. And again, I'm still trying to remember that as well because I remember all the other places that they played the other majors, but I think
Yep.
that PGA keeps kind of blanking out on me. But that's okay. I mean, we can move to
Yeah.
we had two of these guys who previously won majors, both Kepka and Rahman, both are on the way to the Live Tour, and then we got two new winners for the
Yes.
other two majors. One was Wyndham Clark, who won in LA. And
Yep.
then the other one was Brian Harmon, who won in, I think it's the Royal Liverpool, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that's
That was the British Open. So interesting about both Wyndham Clark and Brian Harmon. Your thoughts on definitely truly underdogs?
yeah.
What we're used to.
Well, yeah, true. Brian Harmon is a name I've been familiar with. He's been around for, I mean, he's been on the tour for probably a good decade, and he plays all the events. He's a grinder, always out there. He's about maybe 5 6 years ago. I remember he had a real nice showing at the U.S. Open, Chambers Bay, I believe it was. Uh,
Hmm.
I think it was the year that Kepka might have won that tournament, if I remember serves. It might have been Aaron Hills actually in Wisconsin. But regardless, he's had a couple of decent showings at majors, but nothing like this. And he basically just led, I think, the British Open from first round to the end. He just kind of got the lead and never gave it up. Played a solid tournament and kept it. Just did what you had to do at the British Open. Just kept it in the fairways the whole time and just played good, solid.
And I think his putting was just out of the world. I mean, I don't think he missed any putt under 8 feet or something like that, too. And I think it was like a 133 and one odds. I think that was the crazy odds that he came back and won when you look at it. And then And for Wyndham Clark, that
Yeah.
was a great win for him. I mean, that was phenomenal U.S. Open. That was the one that we had the short par three, very difficult course, but he somehow managed to win on that course. I mean, I think was that the one where Ricky Fowler had a big lead in the U.S. Open and just couldn't finish. I'm pretty sure it was right, and then I think it was like Xander too. I think Xander and Ricky were on top of the leaderboards, and then
Yep.
they didn't complete it.
And Rory was right there too, if I'm not mistaken. Rory was right there at the U.S. Open. I think he was either tied or one shot back, I think, of Wyndham to start Sunday, and he just, typical Rory in the majors of late. He just couldn't quite, make the big putts.
Right, and I think that comes to like the guys who we traditionally think are the top golfers in the world, the Scotty Schefflers, who's struggled with some of the putting this year, and he could have easily won the Masters, I think. Also, and there are a lot of other events that Rory was contending in, but never could win the big one this year. And can't believe it's going to be almost 10 years that Rory hasn't won a major.
Yeah.
And he's been front and center of everything, whether it's like the Live versus PGA thing, or just being, up in front in many of these majors and winning some of these other tournaments that he has won this year. I think he did win a few tournaments this year, other than the majors.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Rory, as you mentioned, he's been such a big spokesperson for the PGA Tour against the whole live thing over the last year and a half, 2 years as this thing's going down. But I think he recently just kind of renounced or took his name. He's no longer the main spokesperson. He kind of stepped down. Either he's frustrated with the whole thing, way things went down with Monahan and this whole merger with the Live Tour and the PIF fund, or he just realizes, hey, he's got to focus more on his game, in order to get back to that level he was 8-9 years ago, winning majors again. Maybe he thinks it's just too distracting. He's just got to focus on a couple things in his life, more importantly, over the next few years to get his game back on track at the majors, at least. Because, like you said, he has won a few other events, but at the majors, he's just something just doesn't quite register correctly on Sundays for him. He just can't get it done.
Another breakout players this year that we've had, Victor Hovland has actually been solid
Yeah.
this year. Some other disappointments, obviously Justin Thomas. I mean, who used to contend previously, Jordan Spieth, um, and even Dustin Johnson. All these guys have are kind of on the periphery, but cannot win it again. Win one of these tournaments again. So interesting year. I mean, as we go into next year, we'll probably do like a preview before the Masters. Obviously, it's a tradition like no other, like we always know. That'll be the first major, and then we'll do like a quick. I mean, I do definitely see Victor Hovland will have a big year next year, but more to come when we get closer to the Masters.
Yep.
I would think that would be one of my breakout players for 2024. Do you have any?
I think I could. I don't know about a breakout player, but I could see Scheffler getting back into form. I mean, it's not really going out on a limb too much. It's just I think he's hired a new putting coach, or maybe hired a putting coach for the first time. He realizes that it was painful watching a lot of his, like the 3 to 6 foot putts. So he was really poor on those last year. And his tee to green game was the best still of anyone. His stats were the best, I think, number one in most of those categories, but just his putting was way, way, way down the list. So I think he's going to bounce back, maybe get one, maybe if not one, at least one, maybe 2 majors next year. So I could see him bouncing back in a big way.
All right. So I think you had a couple, like technically speaking. One is Scotty Scheffler, and then the other one is Rory. That is a very good, interesting take that you have now that he has resigned as your PGA spokesman. I would like him to do well, obviously. And one other thing that happened on this golf calendar was the Ryder Cup, right? Kind of disappointment, right, for the Americans this year.
Oh, complete. Yes. I mean, it was, I mean, we historically don't perform well in Europe. I don't know. It's been 20 something years since our last win over there, but this was a pretty poor showing overall. I think it was basically over before Sunday even began with the singles matches. And it's hard to figure out. You have the best players, on the world, as far as the world golf rankings list, the better are the Americans on that list. But for some reason, they just don't click as a team, especially over in Europe, and there were many theories, right? You can mention the theory about how the players just didn't they had no competitive play leading up to it for like a month, about 6 to 8 weeks
Right.
for players. Yeah, that was the main one.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. And I think, like I said, Europe gets to keep the trophy for a couple more years. So, all right, that will wrap up the golf one. Let's pivot to tennis, where your favorite, has continues to dominate the sport like no other. I mean, I go out on the limb and say he's probably the greatest to play the game. Excellent 60-minute interview that he had. I think it was last week or a couple of weeks ago. So Djokovic won 3 out of the 4 majors, and he was in the fourth one also. He just lost to Alcaraz in a brilliant 5-setter. So he could have actually won all 4 majors this year. And what resiliency that he has shown throughout, new players knocking in on the door, whether it's like a Tsitsipas or whether it's like Sinner or whether it's like Alcaraz. He's pretty much continued to dominate the sport like I've never seen anybody do. So your thoughts on Djokovic and Alcaraz and some of the other players that had the hopes but
Yeah.
couldn't finish the Grand Slam?
You summed it up pretty well. My guy, Joker over there, he just gets better with age. He just, it was, I think that starting the year off at the Australian was huge for him after what happened last year with him being essentially kicked out of the country for, his passport, I think, being rescinded, and for his lack of, having the COVID vaccine. So after that disappointment in 2022, for him to bounce back, that was a very huge emotional win for him and his team. I'm trying to think back to who he beat. Who did he beat in the final at the Australian? It's escaping me right now. Trying to think
Yeah,
back.
I do know that. I'm just trying to recollect, right? I think I know in the French, if I'm not mistaken, he beat Rudd. I
Rude,
think
yeah. I think Rude's been
Rudd.
to
Yeah,
final.
and obviously in Wimbledon he lost to Alcaraz, and I think in the final in U.S. Open, he
Medvedev.
beat Medvedev, who beat Alcaraz. That we watched both Djokovic beating Ben Shelton and I think Medvedev beating Alcaraz. So we'll come back to that. But you're right about the Australian Open. They did cover that in the 60-minute. Um, so it was kind of a redemption for him to come back to that country and lift the trophy. And I think he will continue to be the favorite. I just cannot believe the Australian Open is probably the earliest of all the majors that starts both on the golf and the tennis calendar. They start in much earlier in January. So really looking forward to the Australian Open. One other thing would be that Nadal. I've been watching Nadal on practicing a lot of snippets or clippings that I've seen on Twitter. So Nadal seems to be his good old self. So I really would like to see a Nadal resurgence so that the sport is much better with Nadal and Djokovic in the game. Obviously, like we were talking about in the ATP NATO finals, that was like Sinner had a great run. He actually beat Djokovic. And then Alcaraz is Alcaraz, right? I think he definitely said he needs to learn how to play much better. I think his temperament
Yeah.
and things like that. So he will be a force to reckon with. Not sure about other players, whether it's like Tsitsipas or Rune or Rude and all these guys. Like I don't know where they are. Where do you think these guys
Yeah,
are?
I mean, it's just us. I mean, guys, I don't know, guys like some of the guys who are top 10. I just feel like they're going to be always relegated to guys that get to the quarters, such as Tsitsipas, Rude, Rublev, for example. Rublev's reached a number of quarterfinals now, never got beyond him, and I mean, hey, that's not bad. If you get to every quarterfinal, you're one of the 8 best players in the world. That's pretty damn good. But to get to that next level, that's a whole nother thing. I don't see guys like that necessarily ever really, or even if they get through, they're nowhere near the level of obviously ever Djokovic or Alcaraz or a Sinner for that matter. I'd put Sinner probably solidly at number 3 right now, behind Djokovic Djokovic and Alcaraz, and I'm sure that's what the rankings show. But Sinner by far, I think, is he just needs to refine his game and maybe his net game a little bit. But he's he's a huge talent. He's going to be there for many years. And then the Americans a little bit too. We can talk. We were at the U.S. Open. We saw Shelton in the semifinal against Djokovic. He was
True.
just a little bit of a deer in headlights that match. I think it was the moment when he was just too big for him. But leading up to that, he just played brilliantly at that Open, and he's got all the talent in the world with the
Big serve,
big
huge serve.
serve,
Yeah.
strokes. He's just got to learn how to kind of build a match, put it together, wait for his moment. He doesn't have to hit the huge shot every time. He's just got to kind of wait for the moment and learn how to kind of construct points maybe a little better. But he's got all the talent in the world with that serve and that forehand.
Yeah. Interesting, during in the 60-minute interview, I think Djokovic did talk about how mental the game was. I think, he kind of observes everything about the opponent, how they're receiving, how they're sitting, are they sweating? So it's very interesting to hear him talk about how mental the sport is. I mean, I know we talk about the physicality of the sport, but what I do see that, every year as you go into each and every year, I feel that someone is going to threaten Djokovic at the top, but every year he comes through. I do feel that 2024 could be very interesting, like you talked about, whether it's a Sinner or Alcaraz, and even the Nadal coming back. Nadal coming back to the French Open, you can never discount him there, right? I mean, that's almost like a given. So I'm very excited about what tennis is going to bring, because Djokovic is as resilient as ever, as motivated as ever. So I don't see him slowing down any much. And I think he almost wants them to come and take the trophy away from him, but he's not going to give it up easily. So, like I said, being a Federer fan and even like a Nadal fan, I've just continued to admire how Djokovic has proved over and over again how great he is. So, but it'll be good. It's great to watch. I like to watch greatness, and this is what we're watching, and that's almost it's going to be a fun tennis season to watch.
Yeah, no, it's just amazing how dominant Djokovic has been over the last years. I forget, was there a stat when Federer won his 20th? Djokovic only had, he had a very small number of majors.
I think it was like 16-1. It was 16-1 or something like that. It was a crazy stat I saw. And that's where Djokovic is right now. But I do want to give one more other shout out, I think, from an American perspective, not in the men's, but in the women's. Coco Gauff won the U.S. Open. So I definitely want to give her kudos. And I didn't realize this. I was just doing some research on, the tennis part. The U.S. On the women's side, they actually had 4 different major winners this year. So it was basically Sabalenka, Swiatek, Wondrosa in Wimbledon, and Coco Gauff. So it's been very interesting, to see. Maybe we will see the Coco Gauff dominate the sport more. It'll be really fun from an American standpoint. Obviously, Pegula is, playing really good as well. But just wanted to give a shout out to Coco as well.
Yeah, no, I think in the women's game, there's just a lot more parity. I mean, I think it's great for Coco. I don't see her dominating. I think she'll be, back in many quarters and semis and probably win probably a handful of majors in her career. But just historically in the women's game since Serena, right, we haven't seen any real dominance in the last, 6, 7, 8 years. You get a kind of real hot player for maybe a year and a half, and then she just kind of fades or retires or something happens.
Yep. All right. So this is a good wrap for both the golf and tennis. And I do think that Dan and I do have one more podcast. I think we do have the NCAA college football championships coming up. 2 big games. Your initial impression on those games, Dan, and before we all dive into the actual preview, I think next week, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking forward to the games in a week from now. I think we have 4, we'll call them blue blood programs. Maybe not Washington just yet. Washington's been they've been there before, but between Michigan obviously with Harbaugh, Alabama with Saban, and then Texas back where they last got to a national championship with Vince Young many years ago.
Vince Young, you're right,
So,
right, and that I still remember that game. Yes, you're right. And then obviously some other teams have actually complained about being left out, right? Like the Florida States, but Florida State. But I do feel that next year is the next year where they're going to expand the college football playoffs.
12 teams.
Um,
So yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
12 teams, which is what I would like, because that's something that would help us kind of, you get the 12 best teams. Obviously, there's always going to be this one team saying that they deserve to be in the top 12, but at least that expands the number of teams that can actually truly, on a given Sunday or a Saturday, whenever they play the game, to actually, prove themselves on the field, rather than computer is doing some rating that kept like Florida State and even Georgia out of the, or even Ohio State, out of the top four, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a very thin margin in college football.
Yes, it's going to be incredible because they when they projected out what the matchups would have been with the 12 teams, just hypothetically with the brackets, there's some amazing matchups. So it'll be like, what's the greatest single sporting event we have in our calendar year? March Madness, right, in college basketball.
Right.
So this
Exactly.
is like a March Madness feel. You get the 3 weekends of important games leading up to the final, as opposed to just the 2 good games. So it's
Right.
going to be like great for the game, great for TV, great for everything.
Yep, that's good. It'll be almost like the NFL playoffs, right? Once the playoffs come
That's
in, and then, exactly like that. So that's a good wrap, Dan. And there was a fun 2023 season, both for golf and tennis. And we look forward again in 2024 with the Australian Open and then the Masters in the golf.
Yep.
All right. With that, we call it a wrap. Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a good Sunday and Merry Christmas and Happy New Year for all of you, and Happy Holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.